just been listening to the opening part of the Hallelujah Chorus from the world's most famous oratorio, The Messiah. The Messiah was written by Georg Friedrich Handel, or, if you want to anglicize that, George Friedrich Handel. If you look up Handel on Wikipedia, they will say he is a German composer of the Baroque era. If you look him up in the Encyclopedia Britannica, they will say he is an English composer of the Baroque era, which in itself is kind of a fun and interesting story. We do know that Handel was born in 1685 in Halle, Germany. His father, also Georg Handel, was a very famous and wealthy barber surgeon. Now, you might be thinking, what is a barber surgeon? A barber surgeon is just what it sounds like. He could give you a shave and a haircut, do a tooth extraction, stitch up a wound, do a bloodletting, and even do an amputation if he needed to. His claim to fame was that he had saved the life of a minor member of one of the German royal families. Now, when his son came along, he decided he did not want his son doing anything ordinary. Already, his son had shown a great love of music, and as a child was already playing the clavier quite a bit and composing pieces, but his father said, "You are not going to become a musician because there are too many itinerant musicians in this world. I want you to become a lawyer." So one of the things he did was he told the servants to take the clavier out of the house and get rid of it because he didn't want his son to be tempted. No sooner had he left for work than his wife had the servants bring it back and put the clavier in the attic and told her son, "You can only practice after Papa has gone to sleep." Well, Handel kept working on his law degree, but every place he went, he would play the organ for someone or play the clavier, and he became quite famous for that. So his father had to eventually say, well, I guess that's how it's going to be. And so he started following both, trying to please his father and become a great musician. I just lost my place, sorry. He was studying in Italy, where he was learning about Italian opera. And he also learned Italian, of course. Italian opera at that time was the big thing in all of Europe. Everyone wanted Italian opera. While he was there, he got an invitation from the Elector of Hanover, whose name was Georg Ludwig. He was a prince. He was offering Handel the job of being his Kapellmeister, which is his master of music. Handel accepted it and came home to see his new boss. And he said to the Elector of Hanover, "All the time I was in Italy, which was about 4 years, I worked constantly. I had commissions from this person and that person, and I didn't get a break. I would really like to take a vacation." So the Elector said, "Well, all right, I will let you take a vacation. Where do you want to go?" And he said, "I'd like to go to England," because he had several patrons already in England. So in 1710, he goes to England for a short vacation that lasts a year. And he only comes back because the Elector of Hanover is saying, "Are you coming back or am I going to have to fire you?" He comes back. And he composes some wonderful pieces, but he's only there a few months when he says, "I really would like to go back because Queen Anne, who was the Queen of England at the time, has asked me to write some special pieces for her. I would like to go back to England for a short trip." And the Elector says, "Well, you are going to make it a short trip, aren't you?" And he says yes. And so he allows Handel to go. Well, that was a mistake. Handel basically never came back. He was in Queen Anne's court and was made the master of the Queen's music. He wrote her beautiful pieces for her birthday and other things. Now, in 1714, Queen Anne, who, by the way, the English royal family actually was German at this point. After the Stuarts had all died out, the end of the Stuart reign, they all were indeed German. So Queen Anne also spoke German with Handel, which was very nice. Well, 1714, Queen Anne dies without any children. And the English need a new ruler. Queen Anne's closest living relative was her nephew, Georg Ludwig, the Elector of Hanover. So he is invited to be the King of England. And he comes to England and becomes George I. This, of course, was embarrassing for Handel because this was his old boss, whom he had quit. So Handel just leaves court for a while and writes some lovely pieces, and eventually George I forgives him and brings him back to court, where he makes him the master of the king's music. Handel was incredibly popular in England. They had not had a national composer of merit since Henry Purcell had died over 100 years ago. And so he was totally the toast of the town. You did not have a party of significance unless Handel was invited. He spoke Italian fluently, French fluently, German, Latin, English, you name it, French, of course. He had many admirers. He had a wonderful sense of humor, but he also had a rather vicious temper. In 1727, George I dies. Handel writes funeral music for him and then writes wonderful coronation anthems for George II, who is those coronation anthems are still used. They were used when Queen Elizabeth II was put on the throne. He becomes master of the king's music for George II as well. Now, George says to Handel, I think it would be a good idea if you became an English citizen. So Handel does. And he goes from being George, what was his middle name? Oh, it's Friedrich, to George Frederick Handel. He changes the spelling, he changes the pronunciation. He was also able to speak English without an accent. And the British just loved him. From then on, everything he composed was in English, which is why the Messiah is actually in English. Now, I mentioned Handel's temper. When he was crossed, he could become very, very angry. And one of the legends about Handel is that a particular soprano refused to sing an aria the way he wanted. And when he talked to her, she said, well, the critics say that my voice is a gift from God. And he picked her up by the waist, yelled at them to open a window, walked over to the window holding her, and threatened to throw her out of it, saying, your voice may be a gift from God, but I can be the devil himself. After that, she complied. Handel's temper was what was blamed for giving him a stroke. He had the stroke in 1737, a minor one, that partially paralyzed his right side. Just as it was getting better, he had another stroke, and that one affected his speech and his mind. There were daily newspaper articles in London following his health, and the one after the second stroke had the headline, "We have saved the man but lost the music," because they felt his brain was affected. His doctors sent him to a spa to spend 6 months totally relaxing. They told him, no music, whatever you do. Handel no sooner got there than he began playing the organ and the clavier and composing and feeling much better because he had decided he was going to get better. And he definitely did. The Messiah was written after he'd had that stroke. It was written in 1743. The Messiah, which is all in English, follows the life of Christ from his birth through his death. So there's a Christmas section and an Easter section. Now, it has become the tradition to stand when the Hallelujah chorus is sung. And there are two thoughts about that. The first one is that it was so moving that George II actually jumped to his feet, yelling hurrah when it went on, and everyone stood up. The other version is that George II, perpetually late, came into the royal box during the Hallelujah chorus, and seeing him there, of course, everyone stood up, because you stood up whenever the king entered. So whichever is true, who knows? In 1752, Handel began to lose his eyesight. We know he had cataracts. We also know at some point he had received a head injury, which may have caused problems there. Handel required something. He wanted to keep his sight. And there was a man, a surgeon, who claimed that he had successfully operated on Johann Sebastian Bach's cataracts. What he failed to say was that, yes, he successfully removed them, and that afterwards Johann Sebastian Bach was completely blind. Handel also had the surgery, and he too was completely blind afterwards. However, he continued to compose and to play the organ, although there were very sad scenes where people helping him walk across the stage and getting him situated and things like this. He composed by dictating to his students, just like Johann Sebastian Bach had dictated to his students and his children. Now, we don't know much about Handel's own private life. We have letters and things like that, but when I say private life, I mean we don't know if he had girlfriends, because he was very much, that is my personal affair. We can talk about whatever you want, politics, the world, music, but I'm going to keep me to me, so nobody knows. We do know that he was a generous man, and he endowed a foundling hospital in London that still exists. In fact, they own a handwritten copy of the Messiah that was given to them by Handel. Handel died in his home in London in 1759 at the age of 74 years old, having outlived 3 of his royal patrons, Queen Anne, Queen George I, and King George I and King George II. King George III was about to come to the throne when Handel died. There was a huge state funeral for him, and he was buried in Westminster Abbey. Lovely statue there. If you go to London, you can see the house he lived in. And if you want to read about want to read about Handel, here is a lovely book, readily accessible at most libraries. So I hope you've enjoyed hearing about Handel, and I hope you enjoy hearing the end of the Hallelujah Chorus. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, and let's stay connected and grow in spirit. We are on Facebook. Search for Unity Church of El Cajon and follow us and like our posts. You can reach us on YouTube at Unity Church of El Cajon. Please subscribe to our channel, watch our videos, and leave comments which can help us improve. We are on the web at unityofelcajon.org. Email or call our church office to receive our weekly newsletters, which lists all of our activities and opportunities to learn and grow together.